Good afternoon. Allan Vyhnalek here with the University of Nebraska. And my job is to work as an extension educator for farm and ranch transition and succession. And I'm very pleased to do that for one more month, because a month from today I retire, April 7th. So I'm done. So I'll explain more about that as we go on today. But Ryan, are you ready? Are we recording? So the point is, this program will be recorded. It'll be at this page, this web page right here. And if you have somebody else that wants to watch it later on, that'd be great. Just tell them to go to the website and watch it. It'll be there, free. Just watch it. And I'll even give you permission to skip ahead and just get to Brandon's part. Brandon Dirkschneider is also joining me today on the program. I'm going to do my dog and pony show for an hour and 15 or so, give you a break, and then we will have him come on about 2:30, and he'll finish you up because he's got some really good details to share with you. Karen, did you have anything you wanted to share from the office standpoint?
No, I don't think so. Welcome to and glad everybody's here.
I want to recognize Karen because Karen's our local educator, and so even though this isn't really her gig, but thank you for hosting. We appreciate it very much. Yeah, she's got land in Boone County, so. You help your brother with the grain cart. Good for you. All right, very good. All right, very good. All right, I will run short of time if I don't get going. Please understand that how many people have not heard me before? Not heard me before. Oh, at least half the crowd. I could use most of my stories then. Understand that I teach by telling a story. The bullet points are meaningless unless you understand the context of why they got put up on the screen. And so I explain the context by giving you a situation that happened that caused me to write that way. Most of my talk doesn't come from a textbook or a research study. Most of my talk comes from visiting with people like you for 45 years, since I got out of college. Most of my talk comes from what I've heard from people in both Iowa and Nebraska, as I've worked both states. And understand that this is a workshop. And we don't call it that, we call it a classroom or a seminar or something like that. But workshop is a better terminology in my view, because I'm going to cause your brain to work, right? And then you have to shop the ideas I throw at you. I'll throw lots of ideas at you. But you have to shop those ideas like going to the grocery store to get ketchup. You know, husbands, you know what I'm talking about. Your wife will send you to the grocery store to get ketchup. And you go, oh, that sounds simple enough. Then you get to the grocery store, and you got Hunt's and Del Monte and Heinz, and you got sugar added, no sugar added. You have 8-ounce bottles, 12-ounce bottles, 16-ounce bottles, 32-ounce. You have gallon jugs. What do I get? And of course, as the joke goes, you always got the wrong one. You always get the wrong one. But you have to treat this workshop like going to buy ketchup at the grocery store. If you don't like what I throw at you, don't get mad, don't get excited, don't leave. Understand there's another idea coming. And Brandon's going to throw you more ideas later on. Shop the ideas that work for you. That's all I'm saying. Just shop the ideas that work for you. All right. There's my contact information, email. You can even leave a phone message even this afternoon, because it'll come to me via my cell phone. That's okay. It'll come. And I'll take care of it usually within 24 hours. And, oh, by the way, if any of your friends are coming to the Acres Open House the next 2 days out at the Lancaster Events Center, I'm talking out there at 11 and 2 both days. So if anybody wants to hear me talk, you're welcome to come. Or you can avoid that too, it doesn't matter. When you see farm succession, you don't have to go. All right, here's some things we're going to talk about: why we don't plan, why we don't retire, some steps that I think are important to consider for farm and ranch transition, and then the most important part, how we're going to put together the family communication to make sure this happens right, okay? That's my talk. I get to talk to you about the soft skills that have to go into this, and that's okay too. This will not substitute for estate planning. I'm only trying to cause broad goal generation and get your brain to go. Because when I talk to ag professionals like bankers and lawyers and people like that work with farmers and ranchers, what I'm finding is that less than half have an up-to-date, current succession plan for their farm and ranch operation. Greater than half either have one that's out of date or don't have one at all. Okay, so I don't know the exact stats there, But as I say, is it close to half? And most bankers or lawyers will go, no, it's not that close to half. Have an up-to-date succession plan. Okay? So we have to do better. We're trying to get you started. We're trying to get you going. And if you listen to me carefully, I will save you time with a lawyer. And I'm not trying to beat the lawyers out of any money here. They're still going to get paid plenty. But if I can save you time with a lawyer, what have I saved you? $300 to $500 an hour. And if you listen to what I've got to say here in a little bit, I could save you at least an hour, probably maybe two. And so I paid for your whole tuition to come this afternoon, which was still free, but I made it so it would be worth your time, actually. All right. Is anybody ever planning to quit? Us baby boomer generations, the people that are my age and a little bit older, we never really fully planned to get out of farming, the bulk of us. Because here it says 18%. This is the latest data I have, and previous data shows the same thing, and Nebraska data shows the same thing. I don't have to even use Iowa's. But this is the latest data I've seen. 18 or 19% never plan to get out of farming at all, and another 52% they only plan to partially get out. That means that about 70% of farmers never plan to quit. Right? That's a little bit startling. And so I'm thinking a lot about that as a baby boomer. Why aren't we quitting? Well, I think it's we're not quitting because we had to work so darn hard to get a control of this land and to take over. We had to be so patient. We had to wait. We had to pay our dues with our parents and all that sort of thing, that now that we have control, we don't want to give it up. And I relate it to my own story because that's the only thing I can ever do. And so just understand that if I was the farmer, I'm not, but what if I was? What if I was the farmer? And I wasn't farming the Vyhnalek ground, but I was farming my mother-in-law, father-in-law's ground, if they were the farmers. And my mother-in-law just passed away last June 2nd in Syracuse. So if I was farming their ground, if I was the farmer for their ground, when would I have gotten full control of the farm? On June 3rd last year. So I'm only about 8 months past that, right? And so would I really want to give control yet? Absolutely not. I just got control last year. God bless her. She was 89 years old. She had a wonderful life. And by the way, she didn't own farm ground either. But the point is, when would we have gotten control? Sometimes not until very much later in life. My favorite story here is to say it this way. Oh, by the way, I'll go on to the next slide. Why are we giving up control of the farm? Why are we having such a difficult time? Us boomers and our parents. Here's my favorite story. Dave Gaylor's story. He's the guy that kind of had this position before I did. And he said a 65-year-old farmer come up to him and says, when is it appropriate to give control of the farm to your son? And so Dave asked him, so how old are you? He said, I'm 65. How old's your son? He's 40. He said, but I'm not talking about my son. I'm talking about my 92-year-old dad. Father and grandson, the son and grandson were having to go report to Grandpa every morning for marching orders. Grandpa wasn't going out there and doing anything, but he remained in control. Is that helpful for a succession plan? Is that helpful for a good transition? I would submit to you we can do better than that. Okay, and I hope that you will consider doing better than that. Why else do we have difficult time giving up control? Because that's what we learned. Because the boomers were so ingrained in this generational thing of work first, family second. All the younger generations, X's and millennials, and now the iGens or the Y's or Z's or whatever where we're at now, it's family first, work second. Neither one of them is wrong. That's just the way it is. All right? But for boomers, it was work first, family. And for our parents, work first, family second. But the cool thing about our parents' generation, the greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw called them, is that they felt that their duty to country was first, work second, to provide for the duty to the country, and then onward. Because those older generations had to either live or survive the Great Depression, or live and fight through and survive through World War II. So it was country first, duty first, delayed gratification. You waited and you didn't travel until you officially retired or whatever. And so a lot of those people never did get that done because within 6 months of retirement they passed. A lot of them did. Now, Equipment allows them to go longer. That's good news. They don't want to think about retiring because that means they might be dead. I'm going to talk about that more in a second. This is an old slide, old data. Cannot afford to retire? I don't know. To me, that depends on what part of the state you're in. I think here in the East, we've had reasonably good yields. Even with the drought last year, it's not horrible. And so with the good prices, we're still in good shape. I think people are financially in good shape. As I talk to bankers, they go, the loan balance sheets were outstanding this year. Very good. Okay, cash flows were good. But I went to Southwest Nebraska, did this very talk in McCook, and the guy pulls me aside at the break and says, Allan, that's still very much a reality out here because it's been so dry out here for so long, 3 or 4 years in a row, that we just, even though with the better prices, we're still not getting ahead. We're still falling behind a little bit. So it depends on where you're at in the state. Cannot afford to retire, that's the bad news. I talked about that. Healthier, longer life would be the good news. Don't have a successor, I think it is about half, and I don't know what to say about that. There's not much to say. Either you got somebody coming back or you don't. And then don't know what else they could do, what else they do. That's me. I turned 68 in May. Why am I still hanging out? I don't know, because I guess I don't know what else I do. To be honest with you, I could have retired during the pandemic, but I didn't want to. I wanted to be out and talk with people one more winter, so I'd have a full winter worth of work before I actually retired. And I think I pretty well achieved that this year. I've been all over the place. So I was out to the Panhandle in November, Southwest Nebraska in January, and the rest of the state. I was in Northeast Nebraska the last 2 weeks, so I'm good. It's time for me to call it. I'll figure out what I'm going to do. My wife doesn't think I have it figured out, but I'll figure it out. All right. Here's the lesson. The lesson is the boomers are not planning to retire. However, we need to think through the whole idea. We're going to separate retirement from a succession transition plan. We have to separate the two things. They're different. Retirement's retirement. Don't quit. As long as you want to go, go. You have my blessing. Go do it. Have fun. Knock yourself out. But we have not been able to figure out how to avoid the pine box. All of us have our demise. We haven't figured out how to stop that yet. What happens to our stuff when we're gone? That becomes the big issue. What happens to our stuff when we're gone? If you want to leave a legacy, think about that carefully. And so my first challenge to you is, as you work on an estate plan, if you don't have one, or if you need to update an estate plan, figure out what your legacy is going to be, but more importantly, figure out where you want your stuff to go in your ideal world. That's really all this is about. What do you really want to have happen when you're done? That's important to think about. Whoops. Okay, more often than not, planning, however, tends to get deferred until some critical life event which forces the family to address the matter. Forget about it. We don't need to do any planning. The family will figure out what to do, so you die. And now you get the family together, and now you're going to have a discussion about what's going to happen with the stuff. That's terrible timing, because we have to recognize that when families have a death, you have this grief cycle going on with people in the family, right? There's the disbelief and the anger and just a total sadness. And then at some point in time, you actually have some kind of resolution in your brain. You start to accept it. But then you flip right back to anger and disbelief. And you can go through this every day or every hour, or you can go through this every 6 months. The grief cycle keeps coming back all the time. About 3 weeks ago, my wife was crying because her mom passed away back in June. Because there's something, my mom would have known exactly what to do right now, and I can't ask her. And she had a tear. The point is, the grief cycle is very much alive. Why are we waiting until we have somebody that's passed away or some catastrophic event, like a heart attack or a stroke or an aneurysm or a car accident or a tractor accident? Why are we waiting for COVID or whatever? I don't care. Why are we waiting for that to occur, then have the family get together and talk? That puts a lot of stress on the family. I can speak to that very personally because when did my mom and dad start working on a farm transition plan? When my father was first diagnosed with dementia and turned into Alzheimer's. We had to hurry up and get some kind of a plan put together before he was deemed not able to answer for himself. We turned out okay, but why would we have to go through that? Because we didn't do it ahead of time when everything was normal. We waited. Okay? We don't plan. Too complicated. It is mental work. And clearly, we have to understand something. We have to work with the right professional to make this happen. I'm convinced, the longer I do this, that our brain can process about so fast. Or if you don't want to think about a single tine system, you can think about twin rotors or whatever, however they go, however those rotors go. The thresher of the combine, if you will, if you're with me. We can process about so fast, the thresher of a combine. Okay. Most lawyers, when they get into their legalese part of their world, will talk this fast. I remember talking to one lawyer, and he's on point 3, and I just figure out what point 1 meant. I have no idea what he said when he was talking about point 2. I have nothing. I got nothing. If you got that kind of thing happening to you, stop them and say, you're going to explain things slowly so I understand, or I'm going to go find a different lawyer. And by the way, they're out there. You can find them. Even in the middle of Timbuktu, Nebraska, you can find more than one lawyer that would be willing to help you. So do that. Don't be afraid to spend a couple extra bucks and get to talk about somebody you like, or somebody you can deal with. I already talked about the death part. We don't want to think about that. And I think the other thing that delays our planning is that we're afraid that if we do something wrong, if I put the plan together right now, that if I live another 5 or 10 years, there'll be something wrong with my plan. And guess what? That's right, there will be. So just understand that it's far cheaper to put a plan together and then change it. If somebody dies or somebody gets a divorce or you buy another piece of ground or whatever happens to cause that thing to have to be changed, it's cheaper to change it than it is not to have one at all. Because the changing is a few $100 to a couple thousand or $1,000 or so, and not having a plan could be hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of mistake. Understand that. That's an important key. It's easier, cheaper to change than it is not to have one. So here's how I think about we need to put this together for the end of life. And the end of we don't have to retire. We don't have to retire. End of any career. We're going to be done someday. We can't help it, but we'll be done. You need to have that top circle, the power of attorney for healthcare and the durable power of attorney or the power of attorney for your personal matters. Okay? And that means if I'm in a hospital, can't answer for myself, and somebody has to help to make decisions with the medical staff, I have the power of attorney that they can talk to that person. Or if I'm in a hospital, can't answer for myself, and I have bills to pay or livestock to feed or something to manage on the farm, who's going to take care of that? Who's in charge of that and make sure that happens? It can be the same person, but you have to have those power of attorneys designated. Understand that. Also, make sure your grandkids or kids or grandkids, anybody over 18 has those documents in place. Because every once in a while I run into a 19 or 20 or 21-year-old who's off in college, comes home, has a wreck on the way home, in the hospital. Mom and dad rush to the hospital to help their kid out. And the hospital goes, where's the health care power of attorney? If you don't have one, sorry, we can't talk to you. They're an adult. That puts the parents in a rough situation. They have to go get that child basically condemned or deemed not able to answer for themselves, which is true. And then the parents become the guardians for that children, the guardian thing. So you have to get guardianship designated with a judge and a lawyer and all that. And then you get your child taken care of and all that sort of thing. And then the state of Nebraska will start hounding you because now you have to take guardianship training. So you have to just understand you probably don't want to get into that bag of worms. The healthcare directive is also called a living will. Some people will put that in place, and obviously that's what it says. I'm willing to be plugged in for as long as it takes to keep me going, as much as it takes to keep me going. Or nope, don't do me, don't resuscitate me, do nothing. Let me go when I'm done. That's what the healthcare directive would give you, that instruction. The bottom left circle, estate plan, will, trust, LLC, other structures you use to move your stuff. That's just, I'm not minimizing that, but Brandon's going to talk to you more about that later. But the point is, that's just the tools you use to move your assets. You're usually going to designate that with a lawyer or other people. Those are just the tools. I want to talk to you about the lower right circle. The business succession side, the farm to ranch succession side. And if you don't have a farm or ranch and you're here this afternoon, that's fine. Just substitute business for farm and ranch because it's the same. So the business succession side, I think we fail in Nebraska and Iowa. And every place else I worked. Everybody else I talked to in the upper Midwest. If we're lucky enough to have that child come back to that farming operation, what have we done, put in place to make sure that child would succeed? Because I'm submitting, the more I think about this, the more I think I'm right. I'm submitting that if we do to our children what our parents did to us, we'll put them out of business. They won't succeed on the farm or ranch. Because what did our parents do to us? They said, if I'm one of 4 kids and I want to go back and farm, I'm the farmer. I'm going to farm however long it takes. And at the end of my parents' life, well, we'll read the will, and what will it say? 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%. Because our parents always thought the fair had to be equal, and equal had to be fair. There's no other way around it. First of all, if I'm asking a young person right now to come back to the farm and farm with me, and they're going to get 25% at the end of their life, are they going to stay very long? They better not. That'd be dumb. You better do better than that. What I'm trying to suggest here is I'm trying to suggest that the young person should get credit for their sweat equity. They should get, if they're going to be the farmer, they have to do better than that. What are we going to put in place to make sure they can succeed? And this is where you need to listen to Brandon in the second part of the show, the second part of this afternoon, very carefully, because Brandon will talk to you about things like long-term leases, first right of refusal agreements for leasing or purchasing, what a land contract might look like. Then there's other things he'll talk about. But I'm talking about what can we do to make sure that on-farm kid can stay. And at the end of the day, if the parents absolutely feel that fair is equal and equal has to be fair and that's the way it is, let's let that be known to the whole family too. That's fine. But let's understand that I don't agree with that. I think the person that puts the sweat equity out there should get a better shake. So please consider that carefully to make sure that they can succeed. Because if I'm a young person right now with the cost of land, the cost of machinery, and I only get 25% at the end of my parents' life, can I afford to buy a brother or sister out? Because certainly one of them is going to want the money. And I would submit, no, you probably can't. Okay. Now, well, by the way, that's been statistically proven. Dr. Shane Farrell, Oklahoma State University, Ag Econ Department or Economics Department, did a Monte Carlo simulation, which is a computer simulation of 500 future prices. And if you ask the kid to take 25% as asset and pay the other 3 off, he can make it 1% of the time. 1. That's what that simulation showed. So please understand that we have to do better than if we want the business to succeed. Too often we get stuck in what I call Al's circle in action. Start at step number 1. I should have a plan. You're past that because you're already at step number 2. You're at a meeting. You didn't have to go to the lawyer. You're at a meeting. Good for you. You're at step number 2. Outstanding. The trouble you'll have is that you're going to go, this is complicated, hard, it's giving me a headache in step number 3, and you get to step number 4 and stop. You'll stop right there. No action. Why? How do I know about this? It happened to me too. It happened to me because I've been giving this talk, parts of this talk for 15 years already. And I've did it the first 10 years or so up in Columbus. And we had a community deal, and I would talk about the ag side and this sort of thing, and I talk about this stuff, and I realized I had the same people in the front row all the time. And so I asked him one day, I said, well, how come you're back? Why would you have, I'm going to say pretty much the same things. Why'd you come again? And they go, well, because we haven't decided for sure what we wanted to do. We haven't made a final decision yet because they're stuck in the circle of inaction. And by the way, for the first 5 years I gave that talk in Columbus, it was me too. I realized I needed to update that beginning of my life will. The beginning of life, the beginning of the marriage will, and I call it the I love you will. That beginning of not life, that was dumb. The beginning of my marriage will, the I love you will, says, honey, I love you. If I'm gone, it goes to you. And hers says, honey, I love you. And if I'm gone, it all comes to me. And it gives the third part of that will, just gives a designation. If we're so lucky enough to have kids, here's who we want to be the guardians. Here's what we're going to take over for parenting if we're gone. A, B, C, D, E. So just understand that, and you need to have that designated. But now that you're towards the end of a career, you have to do better than that. Who are you going to designate, or excuse me, how are you going to make sure that business succeeds when you got several pieces of ground and all this machinery and all this stuff? We have to do better than just I love you will. We have to make a plan for how that business is going to succeed. That's what I'm suggesting. So here's the kind of a sequence that you can use. Step number 1 is if you would do that, I will have saved you hundreds of dollars with an attorney. Because if you don't do it, Tim, I'm going to have to do something here. If you don't do the first step, The attorney's going to sit down with a pad of paper like this, and he says, you go to the attorney, you go, we'd like to talk to you about doing an estate plan. The attorney says, yeah, I'll be glad to help you. What do you have? If you don't have that written down, he'll take out a pad of paper just like this, and he'll start writing. And what's happening the whole time he's writing? Thank you. Ching, 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 ching. $3 to $5 a minute. You can have it written down. It's not that hard. More on that later, I think. I have done it. And then I think once you get it written down and kind of know what you have, I think you need to get the family together to get input. How does anybody feel like they're a part of a family? If I can provide input. That's how I feel like I'm part of the family. No decision making, only input. What does everybody think about the North 80? What does everybody think about that pasture down by Pleasantdale? What does everybody think about the grandma's yellow pie plate? Anybody interested in that? Those heirlooms that came over from Czech or Czech Republic or Germany or Poland or wherever you came from, wherever your family's from? Who's interested in those kind of things? Who would be interested? You look at that inventory, and people look at that inventory and say, yeah, we'd be like to do that, or we'd know, you know. I was the only one that wanted the grandfather clock in my mother-in-law's house, and so my mother-in-law wasn't willing to give it up yet while she was still living, but she put my name on the back. Piece of masking tape, Al, on the back. Al wanted this, he gets it. Just do stuff like that based on your family conversations. Know what you want to have happen. Then the third step is what I call the golden rule step. And the golden rule for estate planning is not what I hear in church, do unto others, as others do it. And that's not that one. This golden rule is, you have the gold, make the rule. If it's a mom and dad, grandpa and grandma, they make the rule. You get rid of all the other family members. I'll talk more about that in a second. But make sure that you get rid of them. Then the people that are in charge, mom, dad, grandpa, and grandma, or them and their kids, never spouses, never grandkids, will have a conversation about what's ideally going to happen. What happens in our situation? What's our utopia? What does our perfect world look like? That's all you have to do with that. Figure out what should happen to your stuff. What would be perfect in your brain? Then you go on to the next step. The lawyer or other professional will put that plan in place. A good lawyer will make that dream happen. We spend far too much time not getting to step number 4 because we get stuck at step number 3. We think we have to have an ideal plan in place, and we have to figure out if it's going to be a trust in an LLC or a simple will before we go see the lawyer. We think we have to figure that out too. No, trust a lawyer. They'll put the right tool in place. If you don't like the tool they use, go find a different lawyer. It's just that simple. Step number 5, the congratulations, your plan is developed, signed, okay? And then the last thing is review periodically or as your situation changes. Remember I said if you buy a piece of ground or somebody gets divorced or somebody dies or whatever, you can always change it. That's what you do then. So that's the steps. I'll talk about each one of them in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to lay that out for you. Do not get stuck. How long will it take you to do this? Can you get it done in 3 days? No. Can you get it done in 3 weeks? Probably not. If you get it done in 3 to 6 months, you can. And so we're at the end of February plus 6. 2 plus 6 is 8. End of August. I challenge you all, if you don't have an estate plan or an up-to-date estate plan, to get one pulled together by Labor Day and have a Labor Day celebration at your house celebrating the estate plan being finished. You can get that done in 6 months. Please have that party for me. Please have a plan. That's my main lesson. Please put a plan together. Get one that's up to date. It addresses your needs right now. Because I didn't change that, did I? That's too bad. Okay. No plan or not telling your kids about the plan that you have, not telling the next generation what the plan is, leads to chaos. I've had situations where, they had a plan, but they didn't tell us. Now that leads to chaos. Not having a plan or not telling the kids what the plan is chaos. It causes greed because many people get dollar signs in their eyes, and that becomes more important than family. That's sad when that happens, but it does all the time. And greed splits families, and then they never have their celebrations together again. I'll show it to you. I'll prove it to you right now. We put 2 monkeys side by side in a cage, And they had to perform a task. You'll see what the task is in a minute. As long as they performed the task, each piece got a piece of cucumber. And they were willing to do that task pretty much all day for that piece of cucumber because they got something to eat. Then we changed this guy changes the experiment, and he gives the first one, he does his task, gets a piece of cucumber. The second one gets a piece of grape. And when the first one sees that, you'll have to see how he behaves now because he didn't get the same thing. All right, here we go. I got to pull this up. The point of showing you that is if you don't communicate a plan, or if you don't have a plan, will the kids behave any differently in your family? I can guarantee you that they will not. The saddest thing that happened to me was I got a phone call from a farmer about 1.5 years ago in my office. He said, he asked me some estate planning questions, which I answered, and then he goes on, Allan, you have to hear what happened to me. You have to hear what I got to go through now. I said, what happened? My mom and dad didn't talk to me about this, but they didn't think that fair should be equal, and they didn't think that equal should be fair, and so they felt like they needed to have a better plan to make sure that I could stay on as a farmer. So that's the plan they put in place. They're both gone now. We read the will recently, and the will specifies that I get more, because most of the assets, not cash, but assets, to make sure that I can keep my operation going. My sister, there's just two of us. My sister doesn't get as much, and but they didn't tell her what the plan was. Didn't tell her what the plan was. And so now I'm being sued by my sister because she claims I had undue influence to the parents to make changes in their plan. He said, I didn't talk to my parents. It happens all the time. I've heard of several of those in these past 5, almost 6 years that I've done this position. Several of those. Too many, as far as I'm concerned. Who wins in that situation? Congratulations, A for the day. Yeah, lawyers, absolutely. And who's never going to have Christmas or Easter or those family gatherings and weddings and funerals again together? Those people. So just understand that. We can do better. We need to do better. Okay, parents make lots of assumptions, and sometimes they're right, and sometimes they just stink. And I want to give you the ones that I think that aren't very good assumptions. Number one, our business is our business and not get shared with anyone. That's a very good trait of us old Germans, us old Czech, us old Polish, and us old Swedes, or whatever you got in Nebraska. All those ethnicities. We don't share our business with anyone. The sad story that came up for me when I was in the Columbus office is a lady that calls me up and says, I should use a different story. I talked about this in Beatrice, but I should use a different. Are you okay? It's a good story. Lady calls me up and says, and Larry Carroll heard this too. Lady calls me up and said, my mom's in a nursing home and she's just been moved from the nursing side to the memory care unit. And my lawyer, mom's doctor says she can no longer answer for himself. So now I have to take care of the business affairs because I'm the oldest daughter. And I've been appointed to the power of attorney the durable power of attorney for the business. And so now I got to go talk to the tenant about the lease. I said, so what's your question? She goes, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry, what's your question? She goes, I don't know what I'm doing. What should I do? I said, well, you get out your written lease and you go talk to the tenant about what you read in that written lease. He said, that's the problem, Allan. There is no written lease. So there's your first lesson right there. We should probably have written leases in place. And understand, okay, now I'll get back to that. And so I said, all right, so what did your mom tell you about what the lease was? That's the problem, Allan. Mom felt that our business was our business alone, and she never told me anything. Just wouldn't share. You know, my parents did it to me all the time. If we went, we farmed right up between Crete and Dorchester, right on Highway 33. If we farmed the field up right up against, when we harvested the field right up against the highway, invariably we'd go to town and somebody'd ask us, how'd that field do? It looked like it was pretty good corn. If I said anything close to being the correct yield in front of my mom and dad, I caught the devil for 3 days. You know what I was going to say. And the bottom line is, because my mom and dad firmly held that you don't share our business with anybody, that's our business, we don't share that. So you had to come up with inventive ways not to get in trouble. You had to say things like, well, yeah, it missed a rain, so it didn't do as well as we hoped. Or, you know, there was some insects in there and it robbed some of our yield. You had to make up something. You had to tell them something. I'm not saying that was right or wrong. I'm reporting. That's the truth. Because the parents' generations rubbed off on some of us, you don't share your business with anyone. So this gal goes, she didn't tell me anything. She wouldn't share that information with me. What do? I said, well, unfortunately, you get to go talk to that tenant, figure out what the lease has been, and kind of maybe get to a written lease. I'm not saying any tenant would take advantage of that situation, but what poor communication on part of our own family not to share that information so people would know what to do. Listen, a written lease is not for us because our word was our bond. Our handshake meant something. It wasn't for our generation. It's for what if happens if we're gone. That's what it's for. So please have a written lease, and please get stuff written down. Please tell your kids what's going on. All right, kids get along great right now. I know that'll continue even after I'm gone, even after I'm dead. The more I do this talk, and the more I be around families, and the more I talk to families, the more I realize that it's the parents that are the glue that holds the family together. I told you, my mother-in-law passed away June 2nd, Mindy and I, my wife and I decided to host Thanksgiving at our house on Thanksgiving. And it was an uphill, a cat herding effort, straight uphill, to get anybody to show up on Thanksgiving Day. Or even, no, it was on Thanksgiving Day. Because both parents are gone. I'm convinced of that. They weren't trying to be mean to us. They just don't, that reality isn't there. I know that all the kids, my kids are all going to keep the farm in the family. That's what I've told them for years and years and years. Even after I'm gone. Keep the farm in the family. So the lady calls me up and says, I took my mom down to the doctor's office in early December, and as luck would have it, on the way home from the doctor's office in early December, we went by the farm. Mom asked me to drive her by the farm one last time. And so I said, oh yeah? So how'd that go? She said, oh, we had to stop out there and look at the farmstead, look at all the farm ground. She loved it. She said, daughter, promise me no matter what else that you're going to keep the farm in the family. This was the oldest daughter. She had the power of attorney, right? They made the oldest one the power of attorney. And by the way, that's kind of a tradition that could go away too. It doesn't have to be the oldest one. Okay? But anyway, you do what makes sense for you. All right. So as luck would have it, that's what the daughter heard. And the daughter said, yeah, Mom, I'll do the best I can. We'll keep it in the family. Mom passes away about 10 days later. So now, at the end of the month, about a month after a month after the doctor appointment, 2 weeks after she passed, the family's getting back together. And there's just the oldest sister, the middle brother, and the younger sister. The oldest sister said, Mom, Dad want us to keep the farm in the family. I'm okay with it. I'll take the rental income. We'll be fine. None of them farmed. Middle brother goes, yeah, I'm good with that. I'll just take the rental income. I'll be fine. Younger sister goes, oh, I live in a big town. Housing was more expensive. I got a bigger loan. I don't have that paid off. And I have a kid graduating from high school or college, I forget. And I've got one that's getting married. And my husband and I talk about going on this great big trip on that interpassage cruise to Alaska. So, wow, I'd really like to have some cash and more than just the rental income. Is she wrong? No. She's got her reasons. We can't be critical of that. But is she going to keep the farm? Is she worried about keeping the farm in the family? Also, no, she's not. So there's a double-edged sword there. If you want to keep the farm in the family, what are you going to tell isn't that probably something the parents should decide before they give it over to the kids if they want to be kept in the family? They probably should control that. On the other hand, I've had parents tell me already, the worst thing I did is give every kid a farm. They should, because they didn't want farm ground. They wanted cash or whatever. So there's lots of things that go into that, and you have to think that through because you have to make that fit for your family or whatever you want to have happen. And the other thing I think we have to be careful of is if we give the kids a farm ground, we don't necessarily just give it to them tenants in common, which is what happened in this family. Tenants in common means each one of the kids owned 1/3 of every acre, right? So if the two kids that wanted to keep the farm ground didn't buy the third sister out, she could have her lawyer petition the court and the land would be partitioned or sold and each get their 1/3 of the cash. Understand that? I think the far better way to do that, if you are able to do it that way, is title each piece of ground to each kid, understanding that obviously it won't be equal, but you can make it up through the other assets that you might have or household contents or something like that. Or if for instance, Tim here in the front row is my is my brother, and we get something from our parents, and his is worth $50,000 more than mine's worth at the end of the day. Maybe I agree to give him half of that, $25,000, over the next 10 years, and that could be written down. Because I don't have to split the difference with him, right? And would I have to cough up $25,000 right away? No, I give it up over the next 10 years, $2,500 a year. I can afford $2,500 a year. We can come up with ways to make that equal, but I think titling each child is far superior, because then everybody can decide what they want to do with their ground. Now, if you listen to Brandon carefully, he'll talk about giving long-term leases to the on-farm kid if there's an on-farm kid involved. That wasn't true this time, but if there was an on-farm kid, you could do that. Okay, I don't need an estate plan. Kids will have to figure out how to divide. I don't care. I'll be gone. I don't care what happens. Good way to start World War III with your family. And since I have 4 children, my assets have to be divided equally, 25. But that's the only fair way to do it. I already talked about that. Someday, son or daughter, this will all be yours. Unfortunately, I hear that all too often. I get done talking to a farmer, which is typically an on-farm kid, and they go, yeah, my dad told me 25% will be, someday this will all be mine. And this guy comes to me, actually, the story I'm referring to is a farmer that came up to me at Husker Harvest Days in September, probably close to 10 years ago now. And he goes, no, it wasn't that long, but anyway, it doesn't matter, 6 years ago. He goes, I'm one of 4 kids, I'm 65, 67 years old, I want to farm for at least another 5 more years. And now we read the will, but Dad's been gone, Mom passed away, read the will, and the will says 25, 25, 25, 25. He said, what if my brothers and sisters want the cash? What am I going to do? And he's in a tough spot, because at 67, you're going to go to Farm Credit Services of America or to your local bank. Are you going to get a loan? No, they're not loaning anything to somebody 67 years old. That's not happening. So you may be, if they want their cash right away, you may be out of business, because you may not be able to get that loan. That's tough. And what did his dad tell to him? His dad said, someday, son, this will be all yours. Unless that's notarized, it's a lie, because he got 25%. He didn't get it all. He got 25%. So maybe the first conversation before you start anything else is talk about when you're done, when you still have a family. Don't make that assumption, get that commitment. Are you going to have a family when we get done? And listen, that sounds so simple, but it's such an important conversation to have, because it changes the whole tone of what happens at family meetings. It changes the whole tone of attitude for people, because they're committed to that family first, not dollar signs or greed, that powerful negative emotion that screws up families. First of all, are we still going to have a family? Get that commitment. Secondly, mom, dad, grandpa, and grandma on the same page. Don't start the conversation unless the matriarch, patriarch know exactly what they want to do, because I've had situations where grandpa told a son how he wanted to see things go, and grandma told a daughter how she wanted to see things go, and they weren't the same, and now we've taken the argument to 2 generations. Understand the problem? Okay, so please avoid that if you can. Work that out first. Don't even start until you got that figured out. So make a decision with the end in mind. What do you want? What's that utopia? I talked about this already. Make that decision with this utopia in mind. Meaning, am I transferring that farm to my kids? Will my business succeed? Or am I ending the business? Oh, and by the way, you got to leave yourself some time to make all that happen. If you're ending the business, if your farm's going to go nowhere, if it's just going to end, and you're selling your equipment, and you're going to get the land out to neighbors or whatever, rent it out or whatever, that's a 3 to 5 year unravel. Don't leave yourself short. Brandon will talk about that. But there's a 3 to 5 year, make sure you got that covered. If you're succeeding the farm, that's closer to an 8 or 10 year effort. 8 or 10 years to get the farm to the next generation if you're succeeding the business, because of gift tax and some other things like that you can use, gift tax exclusion. So get that goal in mind, get that vision in mind, and you proceed with that as your strategy. And the most important thing of all is communication. It's the most important thing I could talk about, and I'm already 45 minutes into my talk, and I haven't even got to communication yet that's the most important thing. Listen, when I have families that are having trouble, either with a lease or with a succession plan for their farm, and I've done both for the last 20 years, I don't know, I don't have the stats, but it's got to be 90% of the time or more. It's not because somebody technically didn't know what to do. It's because somebody either didn't communicate at all or communicated very poorly. It's either bad communication or no communication. No other reason. When families have trouble, it's because of communication, nothing else. Do you understand? All right. First thing to understand is we have to be, one of Covey's habits of highly effective people says, seek first to understand before you can be understood. So the first thing we have to understand about communication is we better start listening. We have to listen. We listen first. All right. I'll prove it to you. I know where I can move to make this work. Will you play along with me? He's done this before, I think. So will you play along with me? All right. So what day is today? Today is Tuesday. Can you remember? Let's see what happened. I got to think about what I did now before I can start telling the story. This doesn't make any difference. I'll make something up. So
This may be unfair because I think he's told me.
what you're going to do to you? Okay.
Yes, it might
All right. So would you play along with me for a second? So what day is today? Today's Tuesday. What did I do on Sunday? I remember what I did on Sunday. It doesn't matter. I'll make something up. So what did you do Sunday afternoon? Just a couple days ago. Sunday afternoon? Okay, very good. And guess what? I did too. And then we went up to Omaha to see my grandson play with the Omaha Wind Orchestra. And it was amazing because he played a French horn, and they had a whole row of French horn, 7th grade French horn players, 8th grade French horn players, play along with them for about 3 songs. It was a great concert. We enjoyed it very much. And it was so fun to see your grandson participate in a music. It was very positive, and I think he had a great experience. All right. So what did I say about what she did Sunday? Nothing. Why did I ask the question? So I could talk about me. All right? That wasn't good communication at all. It was terrible communication. So let's try again. You can change your answer or stick with the same one. What did you do Sunday?
Well, I went out to breakfast with some friends.
Okay.
And then the weather was going to be so nice, we went for a hike. And then we got our bikes out for the first time of the season, and we did a little bit of biking.
So when you went for breakfast, where do you go? Are you living here in Lincoln or where?
No, Bev and Omaha.
Up in Omaha, and where'd you go eat?
First watch,
Oh yeah,
breakfast place.
good place. Where's that? Approximately what address?
They have several of them. The one we went to was in
Bellevue. Okay, very good. That'd be southeast corner of town.
Yep.
Okay, very good. And then you said you went for a walk.
Yes.
And so is there a particular trail or just walk the neighborhood?
I walked the neighborhood.
Okay, very good. And so how long did you go out walking?
Oh, probably about 45 minutes.
Good for you. Outstanding. And then what about the bike thing? Were your tires up or did you have to blow them up first?
Well, been anticipating the nice weather, so it's an e-bike, so charged it up.
All right. Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh, very good. Outstanding. And so where'd you go for that little bike ride?
We went on the streets, but I don't like to go on the streets too much this time of year until they clean the sand off.
Yeah. It can get slick out there, right? I understand. All right. So what did I say about what I did Sunday afternoon? Nothing. What did I continue to do? Clarifying question, because I have to seek to understand before I can be understood. And what we're doing is establishing the relationship so that the other person feels like they were appreciated. Did you feel appreciated?
Yes, I did.
All right. I'm trying to show proper respect. I'm trying to show proper appreciation. There's no conversation that can occur until we show proper respect or appreciation. We have to listen first. And please don't take this political. I don't mean it to be political at all. But I'm really frustrated with watching the actions of our state legislators and watching the action of our congresspeople in D.C. because they're not respecting each other and not showing appreciation for other, and nobody's listening to each other. And that's an equal criticism of both parties. Because each party's going into their own block, going into their own corner with their own blocks. I got my blocks. I don't want them touching your blocks because they're not right. I've got my blocks, and I don't want them touching your blocks because your blocks aren't right. But you know what? If we put the blocks together using the best one, we'd have a much better country or a much better state. Because this shouldn't be about left or right. This should be about forward. Why can't we understand that? And why can't we ask our political people to do that? That's a criticism equally. And by the way, I am not running for office. Let me make that clear right now. I have no intention of running for office. All right, and maybe you don't even agree with me. And that's okay too. You can call me out right now. But just going into our own corner and say, well, we're not going to play with their sand because their sand is a different color or whatever, that doesn't help. All right, we got to get rid of some of that crap if we want this country to succeed or we want our state to succeed. Ask client. Never talk about what you'd like to say until you've made a decision, or until they ask you. You know, my true friends, the friends that I really value in this world, they ask me about me. And everybody else I have to talk to, I'm joking, but everybody else I have to talk to are my relatives. And they won't ask me about me. Some of them do, some of them don't. Okay, just understand that. We make some communication mistakes, big time. One is we ask a question not to find out what to say, but to say what you wanted to say. That's what I did with you. Another one is make any assumption that someone else will say. Karen knows from working in an extension office, you get a message that says, call Joe. He's got a question about EBC. I get Joe on the phone and start asking him about, hey, what's up? What's going on with you? And it's about XYZ. Just don't make an assumption. Ask more questions. Think about how we respond while the other person's talking. I wanted to respond. I think how I wanted to respond was, I don't care for bikes. I wouldn't do that, even on the e-bike. And so, you know, I'm trying to say, but I didn't say anything. I kept my mouth shut about me. It wasn't about me. It's not about me. It's about what you had to say. And and to fix an issue without being asked. I do that to my wife and my children. I fix an issue without being asked. My wife or my child will call me up and complain or have something to say about their life and what happened to them today. And being a good dad or being a good husband, I want to fix it for them. Whoa, you should da-da-da. All right? That's not helpful. Sometimes they just want to complain. Sometimes they just want to bellyache. Let me prove it to you. Here's a video that shows exactly what I'm talking about. So again, especially with those that you're the closest with, understand that they just sometimes want to complain. And you let them complain, let it come. And if they haven't asked you to fix it for them, don't fix it. Just let it go. Let it go on by. Hit the wall and go on down. Just let it go. Don't take it personally. Stay out of that. If they say, what do you think I should do, Dad? What do you think I should do, Al? Then you can jump in and say, well, I think you ought to. Here's what I'd say. Here's some ideas that I'd have. But you have to play that one kind of carefully, and you screw up with your children and your spouse. Okay. Some kind of family meeting might be important. I talked about that earlier. I said, you can get everybody together to find out who has input into what you want to do. Are we going to continue to have a family or not? That's the first commitment. Don't make that assumption. And then parents and grandparents need to design this first, to have a meeting and agree in principle on how to proceed. I think you have to be very careful with family meetings to avoid a disaster. Some families shouldn't meet at all. I'm not saying every family should meet. But generally, families I think generally it's a good idea for families to have a meeting because of what I said before. How do I feel like I'm a part of a family? If I'm allowed to give input. That's how I feel like I'm a part of the family. So, who should be there? Grandpa, grandma, mom, and dad, obviously, son, daughter, son, daughter, son, daughter. And then most lawyers will say, stop, right there, no more. That's what lawyers will say. I think it's okay for the spouses to be there because the spouses ask all the great questions. And they're not being pain in the neck, although it's interpreted that way, but they ask the great questions. I want them there. I want to know what those questions are. And they have the great input sometimes. And then I think that in farming situations, especially if grandchildren show some kind of ability or knowledge about the farm, so I think 15, 16, 17-year-old grandchildren should be there if they're mature and can handle it. And I think there's 19, 20, and 21-year-olds that shouldn't be because they're not mature enough to handle it or have no interest in the farm. Just understand how your family works on the dynamics. Make sure that no one criticizes ideas. What I mean there is you're getting input, right? What do we do with the 80 that's, butts up against Turkey Creek down south of Dorchester? Just making something up. And, you could have somebody go, well, the north end of that 80 floods every time the Turkey Creek floods. So why wouldn't we give that to Ducks Unlimited? And all the farmers in the room they'll want to criticize and go, no, we farm our farm ground. We're paying taxes on that. Both legit. There's nothing wrong with either comment. But there's no criticizing ideas. You're just getting everybody to give input. What do you think we ought to do? What do you think we ought to do with Grandma's yellow pie? What do you think we ought to do with the yellow pie plate? What do you think we ought to do with that antique tractor that's in the shed that's in parade condition, all restored and overhauled and everything? What do you think we ought to do? Get that input. Know what everybody's thinking. No criticizing ideas. And if you're like most families, you'll have one person that wants to talk all the time. You know, you say this, you say this, I've got something to say all the time. You put a gag rule in place and say no. Well, we're talking about that 80 that butts up against the Turkey Creek. Everybody gets a chance to talk about that once. Then you're quiet, and everybody else gets a chance to talk about that 80 next. No one else. Make sure you put those kind of rules in place so that everybody has participation, everybody feels like they're valued, everybody feels like they're part of the family. And the person that wants to sit there and never say anything, you stop and say, hey, Al, what do you think? And you make them say something. Do you agree with anything that's being said? Do you disagree with anything that's being said? You get them to talk somehow because they have to participate. All right, then you get the people with the goal together and they make the rules, okay? I also want to talk about difficult personalities. There's the people that, my business only, they don't want to talk. They're the old, crusty farmer that when you ask them about something important like the estate plan, sorry, Ryan, when you ask them something about the estate plan, they're the ones that want to talk away and get back to work. They just don't want to walk away and just don't even talk to you. They don't want to even talk to you. They just want to leave. They don't want to share anything. They don't want to talk. They don't want to deal with anything. They just walk away. Go back to work. The difficulty is we're not communicating then. That's the problem. So it's either generational value or they don't want to give control because they think if you're going to talk about their estate plan that they're not going to be in control anymore. You're going to make them retire? No, they're not going to retire. You want to think about death so you avoid those thoughts? That could be very real. And sometimes they just don't feel like they're being listened to by other family members. They're not appreciated because nobody's ever stopped and listened to them. There's no great solution for this minority of farmers that are just hard to deal with, or other people in society, for that matter. It doesn't have to be farmers. I've seen them in all walks of life. But the best way to get them to talk to you is increase communication. Make them feel appreciated. Get them to talk about something else. 20 years ago, you could get them to talk about Husker football. 30 years ago, actually. And now it's so irrelevant, nobody wants to do that anymore. And so that's a problem. So you get them to talk about something else. Usually the weather works. So we're going to have a snow this weekend or not? Who knows? You know, we don't know. Sounds like mostly rain. We'll see. And get them to talk about something else, anything else. Or maybe something local, a community. What did you think about that state basketball tournament? Did you watch that? What did you think about the Husker basketball team beating Iowa in Iowa? That was amazing. I was very thrilled about that. Find something else that they'll talk to. Or if you can't get them to talk to you, you go find I call these people that don't want to talk to kings, you go find their kingmaker. Somebody that they will listen to. It could be clergy, it could be the banker, it could be the implement salesman that sold them their last tractor, it could be the guy they go to coffee with, if they go to coffee. It could be the spouse. It might be their brother. I don't know who that is, but they'll listen to somebody. You get them to ask the question on your behalf. Or you go up to them and you give them options. You say, is it A or B? Dad, is it A or B? And they may go, no, don't like those. Well, then what do you think? Then you might have a chance. Maybe. All right? Or you say, well, okay, if you don't like A or B, what's it going to be? They'll go, and you go, no. You come up with your answer by tomorrow. Think about that. Figure out what you're doing. Kind of put them on the spot, make them think. I don't know. There's no great strategies for somebody that's going to be difficult. I'm sorry. There isn't. Just what you have to do. I'm going to talk a second about negotiation. Negotiation, I'm not talking about dealing with the used car salesman or the used tractor salesman. I'm not talking about dealing with your grandkids. For me, it's grandkids. I want a candy bar. I want a candy bar at the grocery store. I'm not talking about that. All right? Are you going to be mean grandpa or good grandpa? You know, the nice, kind grandpa. And I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about how we're going to deal with the family and what happens to the farm business and the assets. That's what I'm talking about. It's a back and forth process to reach a settlement when you and both the other party have opposed and shared views. And this is how I was taught to negotiate, right? Right? I was taught this way. This is the way my dad taught me how to negotiate. We go to the John Deere store in Crete, Nebraska, and it was when it was still downtown along the highway there. And You go deal for the tractor. That's too new of a tractor. I think we were dealing for a G or an H or a D or something like that. I don't remember. It was an old tractor. We were dealing with a used old tractor, 50 or 60 or something. I don't know. The point is, I'll use today's prices. I go in, what do you need for that used tractor? The salesman will go, I need $50,000. And you say, well, I tell you what, I'll give you 40 this afternoon. And by the way, before you got to that point, it's 15 or 20 minutes worth of talk, and then you finally get to first price out. Now you got another 45 minutes to an hour, right? That's the way Dad worked things. That's what Dad did. Talk about the good parts and the bad parts of this tractor. Well, it looks to me like, my dad would go, it looks to me like it has a leak back here. Are you going to fix that before I get it? And blah, 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 all that stuff. And then the salesman will go, I tell you what, you're a great customer over the years. I'll let you have 48. And then you go, well, I'll give you 42 for it. And then another 45 minutes goes by, right? You're talking about other stuff, the Huskers, whatever you want to talk about. And then the salesman goes, well, I got to get going. I got people to see. I got somebody out in the lot I better go talk to. I got somebody I got to call yet. I got to call back. I tell you what, today I'll let you have it for 46. And you go, well, I got to go bed cattle and feed and check cows because they're starting to calve. I tell you what, I got to get going too, but I can maybe give you 44. And then another half hour goes by and you walk out of there making the deal at 45. You know how it goes. Because at the end of the day, you were taught that you had to win. It didn't make any difference that you've done this to the salesman before, and he probably kicked the price up another $10,000 when you walked in, just because he knew you were going to have to win, right? You don't know what he did. You don't have any idea. But anyway, the point is this. My dad taught me we had to win when we negotiated. My brothers, and I still try and do it, but I'm not as good as my brother. My brother's really good at it, but don't tell him that. All right? But how does it work with family if family feels like they lost, if you have a winner and losers? How will that work with a family if somebody feels like they got the better end of the deal? Especially with families, we have to do better than just a traditional negotiation, which we learned from our parents. It should not be about winning. Negotiations should be about how you create values for all four parties. You have to think out of the box. You have to be creative when you think about how you're going to create value. Okay, who's got a pasture? Anybody got a pasture? Oh man, clear back there. Larry, you got a pasture. You'll yell something out that people can hear. I'll stay here. Larry, you got a pasture, and so I really need a pasture bad this year. So you're willing to rent your pasture to me, but what do you need on a per acre basis? What do you need for renting? $50 an acre. Listen, Larry, I'm a beginning farmer and I'm just getting started. I could tell you I might be able to afford 40 cash-wise because it's just that tight at the bank. But here's what I'll do for you. You've got pretty good fence, and so I'll maintain the fence like I'm supposed to, but I'm not charging you for wire or posts. I'll supply all that because that would be a landowner expense. And you got cedar trees, some beginning of cedar trees out there. I'll make sure they're covered, even though that's a landowner expense. I'll make sure the cedar trees are covered, and I'll make sure I cover the noxious weeds, and I'll make sure I won't overgraze. We have to be careful as we start this year because we started with low water, and a lot of pastures got grazed pretty hard last year. I'll make sure that I'll wait pretty close to June 1st before I get cattle in there because we got to let that grow back a little bit. We got to establish some forage before I let the cattle in. Would you consider my offer? Do you see what I did to create more value? Do you see what that was worth? All right? We have to figure out ways to create more value, especially with the younger farmers, to get that all to happen. So my most satisfying story as an extension educator was working with one family up in northern Nebraska that they were, the young couple, they were in their 30s, were living on the farm that their grandpa was on. The grandpa left, now has passed away, and they moved on. The dad of this young couple, he just lived in town, all right? He was the only son, so he got the farm. These people were on the farm. It was only about 300 acres, a small place. And they were fighting, scraping, and doing all kinds of stuff to make this work in terms of a living. The wife had an off-farm job, and that provided the insurance and all that sort of thing. They did everything they could to make this hold together. Turns out that this son that was, son that's on the farm, and his wife, and their two little children, had only one other brother to deal with. He was in town too. He was not going to be the farmer. No way. Okay, so I said, so how's this going to work if you give your brother? And so he said, this guy goes, I can't give my brother half the farm when my parents are gone because if I did that, I'd be out of business. I need it all to keep this asset together and make this work. And I'm kind of scraping it together. I said, what's the value of the house in town, the other assets they own, their retirement funds, all that sort of thing? They said about the same as what the farm's worth. Well, I said, well, then you let your brother have that, and you take this and call it a day. He said, that's it. That's the problem, Allan. My brother thinks he ought to have half the farm. Did you ask him why? I did. And he told us I have to have half the farm because I want to be able to go hunt there. He didn't care about farming, but he wanted to be able to go hunt there because he loved where he could go get deer, and there was, he knew where to put the blinds, and where to put the deer stands. He knew where to put everything to make that all work out. He wanted to go hunt there because that's what he knew. I said, well, this is pretty easy. I said, you give your brother all the assets in town, you keep the farm, but you give your brother one more thing, a simple easement for hunting for the rest of his life. And if he wants it for his children, it could be easement for him and his children for the rest of life. Just do a hunting easement. And typically, that's where it ends with an extension educator. You gave good advice. Try to create more value, right? What I'm talking about? And I don't ever hear back. But as the luck would have it, I got back to the wife of this couple that was on the farm about 4 months ago. I said, what happened? What happened? I'm dying to know. And she goes, well, he didn't go. I don't know how he felt about the hunting easement, but he didn't go for that. But he did offer a great negotiation. He said, if I had this 15 acres, or maybe it was 30 acres, I forget. If I had this 30 acres out of the farm that's primarily woods, I can hunt there. And for the on-farm couple, that was an easy give because that land, it wasn't producing much for them anyway. It was woods, it was trees. And they're going to keep running their cows out there, but it didn't have hardly any grass under it because it's trees, right? So they were going to keep it clean for him. So they worked it out, and it was amazing. And of course, they got some of the assets in town to balance all that out, but he was going to primarily keep most of that. They were going to keep that, and all they had to do was deed him that 30 acres so he could go hunt. But that's how we create more value. That's how we keep families together. That's how we make this all work out. We have to think out of the box to come up with solutions. That's important. Okay, other ideas to be considered. What about rural Nebraska? What's your responsibility? Okay, unintended consequences. So, since we're in Lincoln, Lancaster County, so this is not the same as it is when you're out in Wheeler County or Boone County or even Madison County or whatever. But since the end of World War I, county populations in Nebraska have continued to decline in rural areas. Since the end of World War I, populations declined in the rural areas. Okay? That's not me, is it? Somebody's phone. All right. And so since the end of World War I, we had this population decline. We've not done much to stop it, and I know that rural development and cooperative extension and university and everybody's been trying to work on this rural population problem for at least 40 years. I know that. We've been working on it my whole career, trying to figure out how we're going to stop the decline for rural population. I have a suggestion for you, and I have a suggestion for all Nebraskans and everybody in the Great Plains, so it doesn't become to Buffalo comments. I think that everybody should take the advice of a former football coach that I've heard around here and look in the mirror, look at yourself in the mirror, and point the thumb. If I wanted to have something happen different with rural Nebraska, what am I going to do about it? And here's what I talk about, here's what I'm thinking when I say that. I have a farm. I own a farm in Saline County. My brother farms it. All right? It's in a trust. I'm the trustee now. When I'm gone, my children become the trustee. What have I told the children? You're welcome to sell it. They don't know where it's at. They couldn't drive to it on a bet. How in the world are they going to manage it? They wouldn't be able to manage it. So they can sell it. It's okay. I'm not going to be upset. I'll be gone, right? So where's that money go? My son lives in Omaha. My daughter lives in Ames, Iowa. Will any of that money stay rural? Will any of that money stay in rural Nebraska to make Nebraska better? Probably not. So my wife and I make designations out of our retirement funds to go to the Nebraska 4-H Foundation, to a community, and to a church, and we want to try and make Nebraska better, rural Nebraska better. And how do we decide how much to give? When we put this together with our lawyer, I told my wife, well, we should have 7 children. We've got 2. And so she didn't think that was very funny since we were already in our late 50s. And when we made that decision, and she didn't think that was going to be very humorous. And so I said, no, here's what I'm talking about. I think that 3/7 of our estate should go to our son, 3/7 should go to our daughter, and 1/7 should go to Nebraska. And then we split that up 3 ways. You can come up, I'm not suggesting you have to do it. All I'm suggesting is if you want rural communities to survive, what are we going to do about it? What does that look like for you? You can do what you want. And then the other one down there at the bottom, I should have it on its own slide. It's a really important point too. There's a difference in perception of siblings when you're talking about how the farm work got done. In other words, if I'm the on-farm kid, guess what? I think that I helped mom and dad rock this thing, and we grew this operation, we grew the whole thing because of my sweat equity and because of what I did out there. And by gosh, I rate my contribution as 8, 9, 10 out of 10. Right up there, rock star contribution. Because I'm the on-farm kid, I did all that. All your brothers and sisters won't have the same number. They'll go, little Johnny certainly put some sweat equity in, he certainly worked hard, but he always rode on mom and dad's coattails. Mom and dad were always the brains of that operation. And they'll rate his contribution as 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. I'm not saying I don't know how to fix that. I'm just saying that perception difference absolutely exists. I've talked to far too many families where they absolutely agree with me on that. But just recognize that happens. I don't know how to tell you to fix it, but just recognize that your perception of what that on-farm kid is going to be different than what that on-farm kid perception of what his contributions are. Just understand that. Get your team together. Brandon's going to talk more about this, so I don't have to talk a lot. Just know that before you get your lawyer together, you'll go to the lawyer, make sure you have your assets together. I already talked to you about that. And then your other people you're going to consider are people like ag bankers because they want to be paid off, right, if you owe them money. A financial advisor may be important to use if you want to invest some money instead of just buying another tractor, especially if you're late in your career. They can help you figure that out. Brandon can give you specific strategies for that. Obviously, any kind of a plan you put together, you better run by your tax preparer, your CPA, if that's what you're using. And insurance can be important, especially if you're talking about transfer at a younger age, because in some cases, families that have on-farm kids will have the on-farm kid buy a second-to-die policy on the parents. So when the second parent passes away, it creates a pile of money to help give to those off-farm kids. So they don't get land, they get some of that cash. With today's land prices, I'm not sure we can get enough insurance to make all that happen, but we can get a little pile to start with, part of it to start with. I started LandLink 2 years ago, and just over 2 years ago, and I'm trying to match land seekers that don't have access to land so they can farm and ranch with the older generation that does not have anybody succeeding them. And we're trying to do it we do it an online application. I keep the database in my office or on the university computer, and we don't share that information with anyone, but I'll try and match up land seekers with landowners and give them some options. Right now at this moment, I have about 165 land seekers. I have about 7 or 8 landowners in the system. That's a problem. So if you have land and you don't have a successor and you would like to see your operation continue, consider registering with LandLink. You do it at cap.unl.edu, look for LandLink. And you got any questions, make sure you let me know in the next month. Jessica, I think, is taking that over for me after I'm gone, after I'm retired, so not gone, retired. And hopefully that'll work. Also want to mention the Rural Response Hotline. The Nebraska Rural Response Hotline is an 800 number that's there, still there since it's been there since the farm crisis of the 80s. Just know that if you get stuck, if Labor Day comes and you haven't put a plan together and you need to know how to get started, and Al's retired so you can't go talk to him, call the Rural Response Hotline and get an appointment with Joe and Dave. Joe Hawbaker, Dave Gaylor. Joe Hawbaker is, I think, the best ag lawyer in the state. Dave Gaylor is a financial guy, numbers guy. And they'll give you a free hour to talk to them about how to get started in your situation. And it's really, really important. Joe Hawbaker, H-A-W-B-A-K-E-R. Dave Gaylor, G-O-E-L-L-E-R. And they're good guys, and they've been still doing that. They've been doing it for 40 years, and I think they'll continue. Make sure you use their knowledge. They have clinics across the state. And if you're renting your ground to a young farmer that's just beginning, there's a next gen program that you should know about. And if you set up a multi-year lease, then the landowner can get a tax credit. Landowner can get a tax credit. Okay, do you understand? Does that make sense? Okay, so look up that next gen program. Carla's retiring too, but still call that number and talk to whoever's there, and you can find out more about that. That gives a tax credit to the landowner. And I think that takes care of me. Right on time, Brandon. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Joe Hawbaker, H-A-W Baker, Joe, and Dave Gaylor, Goelleller. I think they would do where if they get a bunch of calls from Lincoln or this area, they'll come to Lincoln and they'll come right here and do a clinic for you. I think Karen let them have a room probably. And maybe you have already, I don't know. I don't think they've been here. They go to Fairbury and they go to Norfolk and they go to Grand Island and North Platte and Valentine. They go around the state, so they're not unwilling to travel. And during the pandemic, they were doing everything via Zoom, so it can be you can get to them. They'll get to you. I'm done. Let's take a 5 to 10 minute break. Karen Wedding set up some water in the back. There's soda machines out in the hallway, and we'll get started about 2:30.
Well, while Allan's getting those handouts passed out, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background, and we'll go ahead and get started. But as he said, my name's Brandon Dirkschneider. I grew up in Snyder, Nebraska, small community up around West Point in northeast Nebraska. I am a certified financial planner. I am a farm succession coordinator. I'm also a chartered advisor in philanthropy, and what I do day in and day out is I help family-owned businesses transfer their businesses from one generation to the next, and making sure that it's as tax efficient and your T's are crossed and I's are dotted along the way. And I'll tell you a little bit more about our background, but the reason why we're here today is we're here to talk about succession planning. And from my 20 years of experience in this, really talking about what we see leads to success and what families have done that promote success of the operation. And the biggest thing that I can tell you, and I know Allan talks about it a lot and I'll talk about it a lot today, but it's communication. And when it comes to succession planning, when we're trying to make sure that the farm and ranch can continue from one generation to the next, it is mentoring. It's all about mentoring that younger generation, that next generation, on why you do the things that you do and how you've gotten to the point of where you're at. And we've seen one too many of our farm families that have treated their kids maybe more as a hired hand or labor than really coaching them or mentoring them to be able to succeed and understand the why on what they've done within their operation to become so successful. But what do we do know? Why? I mean, everybody's heard this. You're seeing this, whether it's in the Farm Journal magazines, Nebraska Farmer, everybody's talking about succession planning. Why is it so important? Why is succession planning such a big topic today? Well, what we do know is that 99% of our farms in the United States are still owned and operated by family members, okay? And we know only about 30% of those family farms have an actual succession plan or transition plan in place. Why it's such a big topic right now is because in the next 20 years, we're going to see the largest demographic shift of wealth our country has ever seen. There are going to be more assets transferred from one generation to the next than our country has ever experienced. Okay? And the biggest thing that I tell all of our clients and all the family members that we work with is if you don't do the planning, you're going to pay the tax. Because there's a lot of tax laws that have loopholes in them, and you can take advantage to where maybe your family's not going to be subject to as much tax. And we're going to talk more about that. Okay? Everybody in here has probably heard the old adage. It takes what? One generation to build the family business, the second generation to maintain the family business, and the third generation to what? Lose it. Okay? And that has a lot of times has a negative connotation to it, doesn't it? Negative connotation is maybe that third generation just was maybe a little bit too much of a silver spoon syndrome and spent it away. You know, with most family farm and ranches, that is not the case. And I am here today because of that exact scenario. So in 1977, my great-grandfather passed away, and he owned outright, free and clear, debt-free, 640 acres. My great-grandfather had 8 children. What did he do? He split it equally. Each kid inherited 80 acres. In 1990, my grandfather died of pancreatic cancer at the age of 56. I am his oldest and only grandson. In 1990, what did the banks want? They wanted to get paid off. I sat at the farm auction and I watched everything disappear. I watched my dream disappear. My maternal grandfather was a statistic of the 80s. He went belly up. I grew up on both of those farm places. They are both no longer even involved as a major operation. Now, if my great-grandfather had to do it all over again, I bet you his decisions would be different than to split it equally, because equal is always fair, right? Fair is always equal? Not even close. The viability of the American family farm should not be done on an emotional stand base. It should be done on, is it financially feasible to carry that farm on to the next generation? I'm lucky. My wife, I was able to marry back into agriculture. My father-in-law runs a larger commercial feedlot operation up in West Point, up in Cumming County. We feed about 10,000 head of cattle. We got just over 800 acres of row crop. I was one of the lucky ones to be able to get back involved. But today, I'm here to make sure that that doesn't happen to your families. So what are the components of a succession plan? A succession plan for a farm operation is really to make sure that that farm or ranch operation can continue for future generations, and that it is a viable operation. So when we talk about components of that succession plan, what are we looking at? It's more than just estate planning. That's one aspect of a succession plan. It's, are mom and dad on the same page? I know Allan talked about that earlier, but are the patriarch and matriarch of the farm families on the same page? Because before we can start a succession plan, mom and dad have to be on the same page. What role does family have in the process? And can we identify who the successors of the operation are going to be? Yeah, we're going to talk about estate planning. We're going to talk about contingency planning. But then we're also going to talk about entities and what role they play. How do we minimize taxes along the way? How are assets going to be valued? What's our exit strategy? And then, as always, this isn't something that you put in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and say, yeah, I have a succession plan or I have an estate plan. Because every time Congress or Senate go into session, they create job security for me. Because they change the rules. And every time they want to change the rules, guess what we have to do for our clients? We have to go update the plan to make sure that your plan's not affected by the rules that they dream up in Washington. So, failing to plan is planning to fail. Unfortunately, my family was a first-hand experience in that. My grandfather did not have a plan. He did not have insurance, he did not have a plan, and he died way too soon. Here's the top 5 reasons that we see from a day-in, day-out standpoint that farm and ranch plans do not succeed. There's no current estate plan or succession plan, or it's inadequate. And when I say it's inadequate is the documents aren't drafted to specifically address the concerns that your family have. I've seen way too many times where an attorney will go in and press Control 5 and print out a generic template, and the verbiage is not even close to adhering to what the goals and objectives of that family farm has. Insufficient capitalization, failure to prepare the next generation properly or mentoring, and failure to communicate and understand the why. Failure to communicate. Okay, and we're going to talk about that communication here a little bit more. Okay? So in this room, who believes that they have a transition plan in place? Okay? You all do. If you die without an estate plan in place, you die intestate, and the intestacy laws of the state of Nebraska will decide how your assets are distributed for you. Who would you rather decide how your assets are going to be distributed? Some judge sitting in a county court, or you guys? And in today's world, there's times where we have second marriages in place, if we have adopted children, if we have other dependents. But if you die without that estate plan, you die intestate, and the state laws of the intestacy in Nebraska will dictate who does what. And that's when our phone rings. because the kids are fighting. The kids are fighting like cats and dogs, and everyone is lawyering up. And if everybody's lawyering up, who wins? The lawyers. Yep. So mom and dad, the biggest thing that I can tell you to do today is if you do the succession planning today, the people that don't win are the lawyers, and the people that do win are your kids. So for the younger people in the room, or even mom and dad, everybody always wants to know, how do I start the conversation? My father-in-law's biggest thing, he fought me for years. Well, I'll be dead and gone. I don't have to worry about it. Kids will have to worry about it. Okay? Again, do you want your kids lawyering up? Do you want Uncle Sam to be able to dictate what's going to happen to your assets or how they're valued or when? So how do we start the conversation with our family members? One of the biggest things that I have seen work is asking that senior generation or talking about the history of the operation. How did you get to where you're at today? And what decisions did your family make over the past 20, 40, 50, 100 years? Because a lot of our family farms have been in our families for 100 plus years. They're heritage farms. What decisions did you make along the way to get you to where you're at? For a lot of the younger generation, I'll tell them, take a roll of butcher block paper, roll it across that kitchen table and say, when did we homestead this place? And how did we get to where we're at today? I always hear you talk about we used to own that 80. How did we lose it? Or you had to buy your sisters out. Why did you have to buy your sisters out? And how did you determine how you bought them out? How did you know you could do that? Talking about the history of our family farms and operations gets that senior generation talking, but it also helps all the family members understand how you got there and what pitfalls you can to avoid. So it helps understand their own control over the operation, attitudes regarding change, because it was the biggest thing for a lot of our farm families. I mean, Dirkschneider, I am German. I hate not having control over a situation. I want to control everything. I'll talk about my 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters. Not being able to control who they're going to marry is like, holy cow. Gives me anxiety, okay? But transition and change does give people anxiety. It does create that uncomfortable situation. So what do we know about that change aspect? And how does it affect our core values or our knowledge or skills? Or do our kids have the knowledge and skills to be able to carry this on to the next generation? Think of how much technology is changing the family farm operation. I have a client right now who believes that he will be able to fully automate my father-in-law's feedlot operation to where he would only have to have 2 or 3 employees. And he says that'll happen in the next 10 years. So, then we got all these family members who are stakeholders. Okay? So when we're talking about a succession plan, it's not just the people that are active. It's who are the stakeholders in our family farms. It's our financial investment stakeholders. Allan always talks about the golden rule. It's not the one you learn in church. He said that earlier. He who has the gold gets to make the rules. But who else has ownership? Or who else gets to make management decisions? And who are the emotional stakeholders? Because those ones that have the emotional stakeholders can sometimes upset the apple cart because they don't understand the why. They don't understand why mom and dad are making the decisions. And if they don't understand why mom and dad are making the decisions, you know what the first thing is going to happen after mom and dad pass away? It's going to be, well, I saw you at mom and dad's every Sunday for supper, and they never would have made these decisions if you weren't in their ear begging and pleading every freaking Sunday for supper, right? But if mom and dad come out and they help communicate why they're making the decisions and why this might make sense, now all of a sudden those inactive kids help understand the why. And we'll talk more about that. So this is the biggest thing that I can tell you is communication throughout this process is the most important thing. I can educate you at taxes, I can educate you about legals. That's the easy part. The emotional part about this process is the most difficult. Okay? So 3 factors that correlate significantly with family business longevity are frequent family meetings. We're working with a family right now. Dad died of COVID. 2021. Dad ran his operation as a dictator, okay? It was his way or the highway. He built an amazing operation, very successful operation. But Dad died. What do you think the 4 kids who are all working in their operation now are trying to do? They're trying to become the new leader, okay? And when they weren't having open lines of communication, how successful do you think they were? But today, we're in a much better place. We've had frequent annual meetings. We've had strategic annual planning meetings on the direction of the operation and where they want to be in 3 to 5 years. And getting everybody on the same page and under everybody's each individual goals and objectives versus the own overall objectives, those family meetings are very, very fruitful. So meetings and open lines of communication. And the notion, and I see it all the time. My father-in-law was one. You know, meetings are a waste of time. We got work to do. Cattle aren't going to feed themselves. Water tanks aren't going to get scrubbed themselves. We got work to do. And the meetings were always pushed off. We can do it another time. We can do it another time. But it's the old adage. It's just like any other business. You spend all day working in your business instead of on your business. Those that stop to work on their business are more successful when they work in their business. Okay? So we want to talk about facilitating communication, coordinating the workflow, how we're making decisions and improve that decision making. Again, understanding the why or proactively addressing what's the elephant in the room. Because when family members work together, there's never an elephant in the room, is there? I mean, every day is rainbow and sunshines. One of the reasons I can tell you, my father owned his own business. He owned a convenience store, grocery store, liquor store, gas station. It was everything in all communities. And I can remember having the conversation with my dad. It's like, well, do you want to come back and maybe we start opening up multiple stores? And I'm like, no, because I know exactly what my dad and I do. We do this all day long. Okay? And we weren't really big on that thing of having father-son talks. But hindsight being 2020, it could have been a viable operation if we would have had those candid conversations. And for you men in the room, when you're farming with your sons, it's not 2 ships passing in the night. It's saying, how can we do this better? This happened today. How can we do it better next time? Okay? We got to address those elephants in the room when they're out there. And for you senior generations, what that does, that takes a little bit of self-reflection. Okay? That's what I can tell you. Having 3 younger daughters and a wife, I understand the self-reflection. Because sometimes there's just better if I keep my mouth shut than trying to help them understand it, like you saw the nail on the head video earlier. Okay? But talking about what is our interpretations of ownership or who's participating in the business or compensation, what's fair, responsibility or work ethic. Because a lot of times these are the elephants in the room where little Susie's working day in and day out, but little Johnny's has a full-time job off the farm and is playing weekend farmer and is treating it exactly the same. Ran across that this Saturday morning. And there were some hurt feelings in there. So how do we address those and how do we make things fair? But all family members need to understand what's the mutual purpose. And this isn't saying that it's this way for all family farms. But what's the number one goal and objective? And I will ask every family member here today and the ones that we work with is what is the number one goal and objective? If the number one goal and objective is to make sure that the family farm can continue for your future generations, your children and your grandchildren's generation, or is it that your kids are treated fairly or equally? Because there's a lot of times that those two cannot be the same. So what's the number one goal and objective? And are we all shooting towards that same goal? So let's break these down a little bit, okay? So what are some of the things that we've seen happen that cause pitfalls along the way? And what are some decisions that you need to be making with regards to your estate plan while you're living? Okay? Well, the number one thing that we see is most farm families don't provide power of attorneys. Okay? You have to be able to continue to conduct business. You have to be able to sign checks. You have to be able to buy inputs. You have to be able to market corn. You have to be able to market livestock. And if you're incapacitated or you're too sick or injured to be able to do that yourself, who can conduct business on your behalf? They can only do that with the power of attorney. It's the same thing for healthcare. If you can't make decisions for yourself, who's going to make those healthcare decisions for you? Even as a husband and wife, you need power of attorney over one another to be able to make healthcare decisions for one another. Those are power of attorneys. Those are very, very important for our farm families to have. And then we also have possibly, how are we protecting our assets from long-term care expenses? Do we look at things such as a life estate? Do we give assets away during our lifetime? Do we buy long-term care insurance? Is it worth the premium dollars to shift that risk off to an insurance company? Once we pass away, once we are deceased, those power of attorneys are null and void. They're no longer enforceable. So then once we are deceased, your estate planning documents should tell you or determine who gets what, how, and when. They should maximize your estate or the value of your assets by reducing expenses and avoiding delays. We should be structuring it in a way to avoid family disputes, and we should be helpfully minimizing estate taxes, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the first step, at minimum, everybody should consider at death is having a will. And a will is nothing more than a legal document that does not take effect until you pass away. You pass away, your power of attorneys are null and void. Those people no longer have power to make decisions for you. It is whoever you name as the executor of your estate. And that will is a legal document. It can be changed as many times as you want to up until the date you pass away. State laws will vary a little bit, but the benefits is it will transfer your asset. If you have minor children or dependent children, it will name guardians over those children, and it can establish what's called a testamentary trust, which it can dump assets into that trust to be managed for your minor children or dependent children based on your wishes. Okay? The benefits of having a will is it costs you guys to go through probate. Okay, so probate is good because it limits the time somebody can challenge your will. It limits the time creditors can make against your estate. Okay, and it is a court-supervised process to make sure that the executor that you named in your will is distributing your assets based on what you have written in your will. Okay, disadvantage is it can be a lengthy process. It can be a costly process, and it's a public process. Because it's court supervised, it has to be published, and everybody's going to know what you have and who it's going to. And I will also tell you that a lot of times, unfortunately, we're still seeing law firms that are charging a percentage of the estate, and that's an antiquated pricing model. Every attorney should be charging you a fee for their time, not a percentage of what the estate's worth. If you have an attorney that's trying to charge you a percentage of what the estate is worth, find a new attorney. So, can you avoid probate? Absolutely you can avoid probate. You can avoid probate by how you title your assets. Okay? So if an asset is titled with joint tenants with rights of survivorship, whoever is listed as the survivorship, so i.e. your house, if it's titled between you and your spouse, the first spouse passes away, now the surviving spouse owns 100% of that asset. Okay? You can avoid probate by naming beneficiaries. Beneficiary designations supersede what your will states. So beneficiaries on IRAs, 401ks, life insurance will go to that named beneficiary and not per what your will states. Okay? So if you're in a second marriage, make sure your new spouse is named as a beneficiary. I've seen an ex-spouse named on a beneficiary once, and it did not go so well. Okay? We could have transfer on death deeds, payable on death accounts, PODs, TODs. That supersedes whatever your will states. Or you can give it away during your lifetime. Because if you give the assets away during your lifetime, you no longer own them. They're not there to be disposed of. Or we can use trust, okay? And at times when you're sitting in front of a room, I hear, Brandon, trust is a naughty word. I've had my neighbors tell me never to use a trust because of X, Y, or Z. I'm going to tell you a trust is a very powerful tool to use, especially within succession planning. So what is a trust? Well, a trust is nothing more than a document that holds and manages an asset based on what you want, okay? So I said earlier, I have 3 daughters, 21, 18, and 14. Drop dead gorgeous, look just like their mother. Thank God not like me, okay? But my wife and I, a few years ago, made a decision. We don't know who they're going to marry. We don't know what financial decisions they're going to make. Hopefully decent ones. But if we both got hit by the Mack truck today, we wanted to protect those assets, our assets, for the benefit of our daughters. Because anything that's left into a trust, my daughters would not own. So if my daughters don't own those assets, guess what? They're not subject to a divorce proceeding. They're not subject to a lawsuit. They're not subject to a bankruptcy because they don't own them. And because they don't own them, it means they can't lose the asset. Now, they're named beneficiaries of the trust. My wife and I are the grantors. We created the trust agreement, what it states. We put the property in the trust. We named a trustee to manage it. They're listed as income beneficiaries. So our farm ground, our life insurance proceeds, my business interest, our investment accounts, anything that we want to put in there gets put into this trust. And if we're both gone, the trust becomes instead irrevocable, and it cannot be changed. But here's a couple of neat things you can do. My daughters, once they turn 25, they're named as co-trustees on the trust, so they're going to get mentored along the way by who I named as trustee to help them educate them on the decisions they're making and why they're being made. But since our trust is revocable in nature, as long as my wife and I are alive, we can change it. So if my daughters 10 years from now are productive members of society, married somebody halfway decent, and they're making good decisions, my wife and I can change the terms of our trust and say, okay, well, maybe you're going to get assets at 35, 40, and 45, or whatever you want to put in there. Because these can be written any way you want to. So for our farm families, how do we use a trust? What's a good tool to use a trust? Well, what would have happened if my great-grandfather would have said, you know what, instead of dividing the 640 acres, 80 acres per kid, we're going to put it in a trust, and I'm going to name you 8 kids as income beneficiaries, but guess what? You're never going to own it unless you're an active farmer. And my grandfather and his brother, which were the 2 active farmers, had always the right to cash rent the ground from the trust. And let's say maybe they had that to do that for a period of years, or they had the first right of refusal to buy the assets out of the trust. Would have our operation maybe looked a little bit differently today? Possibly, depending on how it's written. So a trust, again, is nothing but a tool to help control and manage an asset for the benefit of future generations. You'll hear a lot of times, too, people will say, well, I don't want to control from the grave. You don't have to. You get to set the terms of the trust. I have families that'll set that up to where it bypasses their children's generation and it goes to their grandchildren, because it prevents Uncle Sam from taking another bite at the apple for federal estate tax purposes. And we'll talk more about that. Okay? Helpful? So, revocable trust, again, As long as you're alive, you can change whatever that trust says. But it's when you pass away, it becomes irrevocable, okay? Advantages, it avoids probate, it provides incapacity planning and asset management, it protects your privacy because if when you die, it doesn't go through the courts. Reduces administration burden on loved ones. Disadvantages is it's more complex and work up front, and it's a little bit more expensive than what just establishing a will is up front, but it'll save you a lot more money on the backside. Okay? So let's talk about taxes. I love Uncle Sam. I think he should get his fair share. Fair. So let's talk about taxes. With regards to farm succession planning, there's things that you need to be paying attention to. There are gift taxes. There's the federal gift tax, which is a tax imposed on assets when you give them away during your lifetime. Then we have federal estate tax, which is a tax imposed on assets that you leave to your children at your death. Okay? Then we have federal generation skipping tax, which is a tax that is imposed on assets that you leave to your grandchildren or great-grandchildren, more than one generation away. And then we have to pay attention to the Nebraska inheritance tax, which just got a little bit more benefit here after January 1st, 2023. So immediate relatives, your sons and daughters, are subject to a 1% inheritance tax on anything they inherit over $100,000. This tax goes back to the county, helps support roads, bridges, anything for the county needs. But if you're leaving assets to a niece or a nephew, or an aunt or uncle, that tax is now 11% on any asset over $40,000. And if they're a non-related transferee, that tax is 15% on anything above $25,000. So if you have a niece or a nephew coming into the farming operation and you're going to leave those assets, that's something that needs to be accounted for because that liquidity is going to have to be there. But the federal and estate and generation skipping tax, they are all mirrored together. Currently, I need to update this for 2023. So 2023, that number is $12.9 million per person. So essentially, mom and dad can give away $26 million to the next generation, and they're not subject to federal gift tax, estate tax, or generation skipping tax. Okay? So mom and dad are both still alive. They can give $26 million away. That's a lot of assets. It's a lot of farm ground, equipment, livestock, grain inventory, other things that they can simply give away that is not subject to tax. But, and this is the big but, okay? January 1st, 2026, that law is scheduled to sunset. It is written into law today, meaning it will automatically sunset back to $5 million per person. It will be adjusted for inflation. We're estimating maybe around that $7 million per person. So now all of a sudden, mom and dad can only pass $14 million worth of assets to the next generation without paying the federal estate tax or gift tax or generation skipping tax. So $26 million today, $14 million after January 1st for a husband and wife. That's a $12 million difference. If you don't use the exemption today and you're over that $14 million mark, you are voluntarily paying a tax that starts at 40%. So if you're worth $26 million today and you do nothing, you just voluntarily paid $4.8 million in tax when you didn't have to. That is powerful. That is something every farm family needs to understand because it doesn't take that many acres at current land prices to get to that dollar amount. Okay? Everybody follow that? Other important attribute to remember is that's a bottom up. And when I say it's a bottom up, that exemption at $12.9 million today versus when it falls back to potentially $7 million. So let's say you give away $7 million and you give away nothing else. You don't get the top half because you fill the bucket from the bottom up. So to get that $12.9 million exemption per person today, you have to give it all away. Okay? How many people want to give their wealth away? I talked earlier how big of a control freak I am. There's no chance in God's green earth I'm going to give everything away when I'm 47 years old and I still have a long road ahead of me, hopefully, God willing. A lot of you I see shaking your heads. Do you want to give this away that you poured your blood, sweat, and tears into? No. But there's a lot of other tools out there where you're not giving it to your kids. Okay? So you'll hear acronyms and you'll see these in Farm Journal magazines. They're called Spousal Lifetime Access Trust. Trust being the tool. Okay? It's all on how that trust is written. But all it is you're giving your assets to the trust, but you get to retain the right to the income stream for the rest of your life. Your kids don't own the assets until you pass away. So in essence, it's a tool to let you use the higher exemption amount. You're giving the asset away. In return, you're keeping all the income stream. There's lots of different tools out there like that to help our family members plan, proactively plan, so they don't have to pay the tax. Okay? So when I talked earlier about trust being a tool to manage asset, that's just one example of how we look at this. Okay? So a lot of people will say, Brandon, well, they're going to extend that. You got to remember, that is written in the law today. So for it to change, that means Congress has to sign it into law, Senate then has to sign it into law, and then the president has to sign it into law. So we have to have 3 different, basically, people agree. How well does that happen in Washington at this point in time? So, and the other aspect is do not wait to the last minute, because I will tell you, every law firm and accounting firm that we're working for, they're shutting us down on June 1st, 2025. They're not going to take any more new clients after that because they're going to have their hands full, because you have to have valuations on assets, appraisals, and you have to have new deeds, and you have to have all this done and executed. And they're not going to be rushing around on December 31st. So start your planning today. So what constitutes a taxable estate? Okay. When you pass away, what do you have to file? You file a 706 form. It's basically telling the government what you owned and what it's worth. And it's not what you think it's worth. They require you to go out and get appraisals. Okay? Certified appraisals. So they want to know what personal property you own, what retirement plans, IRAs, stocks, bonds, insurance, business interests, grain on storage, prepaid inputs, cash on hand, land that you own. And it's not, again, it's not the tax assessed value of the land. They will have you get an appraisal. It's what the market value of the land is. So then you get to take death taxes, accounting fees, appraiser fees, attorney fees, minus any debt or liabilities, and whatever that number is down at the bottom, after all of that, that's your net estate. And if it's over the exemption amount, you're going to pay a federal estate tax. That starts at 40%. Okay? Currently on the books today, there are rules on how those assets are valued. How many of you, when you open up the plat map or you go on the assessor's website, how many of you see LLCs? A lot of LLCs out there. They're a wonderful tool, okay? Because I can go in and I can put my farm ground into an LLC, and in that LLC, I can create voting shares and I can create non-voting shares. And I can retain all of the voting shares for me and my wife, and I can give my non-voting shares to my 3 daughters. And let's say in this example, I give my 3 daughters 5% of that LLC interest each. Okay? So now my wife and I own 85%, and my daughters own 5% each. My wife and I pass away, and we want to sell our 85%. Are you guys going to come in and buy 85% of an LLC that owns, let's say, 120 acres and be business partners with my 3, remember, spoiled 3 daughters? You know why you spoil them? You spoil them so when the boys come along and they're not treating them well enough, then they just kind of push them away. No, I'm just kidding. But would you pay full market price to own 85% of a 120-acre parcel? No, absolutely not. And the IRS agrees with you at this point in time. So they give us what's called lack of control or lack of marketability discounts. And depending on where the comfort of your attorney or your accountant is, they will give you a discount maybe as high as 30%. Okay? So if we took that 120 acres and let's say it's worth $10,000 an acre, and we take a 30% discount, what is that? We got 120 acres, 1.2, what's that, $1.2 million value. So we just dropped the value of that from 1.2 million by 360,000. So now it falls down below. So now let's make the number bigger. Okay, let's say you have $20 million worth of ground. And we put ground in ways where we can take a 30% discount on $20 million worth of farm ground. 30% of $20 million is $6 million. $6 million off $20 million is now $14 million. Now all of a sudden we're what? We're below the federal estate tax exemption and you don't owe any federal estate tax whatsoever. We just saved you $1.8 million. Okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, but that's if you have put your farm to an LLC.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now where does the trust come into play?
The trust would then own the shares of the LLC. Because now instead of the trust owning the farm ground, the trust is going to own the shares of the LLC and manage that LLC interest just like it would manage the farm ground. So this is where I always tell most people, is the juice worth the squeeze? Not everybody's going to use these same planning techniques. Every farm succession plan isn't a cookie cutter approach. There's so many different rules of thumb and different ways and different goals and objectives that they're trying to accomplish. But these are tools in the toolbox to help control and manage assets and minimize taxes along the way. So the trust is written to distribute assets based on whatever you want. Okay? The trust would distribute the shares of the LLC out to whatever kid you want them to. So maybe you only want the on-farm child to inherit the LLC interest. Or if you're going to give all children LLC interest, so back up, we'll talk about this. There's times where we'll create different LLCs for different kids. So the inactive child maybe is going to be the beneficiary of one LLC, where the other active child is going to be the beneficiary of their own LLC. That way they have their own LLC interest. We've gotten the discounts that we wanted to, so we can get the asset discounts. We're not going to pay that federal estate tax. And now they own and control their own LLC. But if you have an entity, what else do you have with an LLC? You have what's called an operating agreement. And we're going to talk about what needs to be in that operating agreement to protect the future generations. So it's just think of the LLC as an asset. And it's just going to distribute the asset based on what you want. Because of the trust agreement, because the trust is distributing the asset. I'll talk more about the operating agreements here in a little bit. Basis. We usually get this question a lot because there was a time where they were going to get rid of step up and basis, right? Okay, and that's no longer an issue or perceived to be an issue right now. But when we talk about succession planning, why is basis important? Okay? This goes back to helping your kids understand the why. So we run across a lot of farm families and saying, okay, how do we establish that on-farm child to be successful? They need to be building what? They need to be building equity on their balance sheet. Okay? And if they're building equity in their balance sheet, a lot of times they're being given assets from mom and dad. Well, if little Susie's being given assets and little Johnny's not actively involved, and he's going, well, why is my sister getting this, but I'm not? Well, let's stop for a second. If I'm giving farm ground to that on-farm child heir, and I'm giving it to him, they're retaining mom and dad's basis. So if mom and dad paid $500 an acre for this 80, and they've given them that 80 acres, that on-farm child's basis is $500 an acre. So if they did turn around and sell it at $10,000 an acre, they owe capital gain tax on $9,500 an acre. Is there a lot of incentive to sell that? No. There's incentive to retain that and continue to grow the operation, and maybe they need that 80 acres to post as collateral to go buy another 80 in their name. Where if I hold on to the farm ground that I'm going to leave my non-active child until death, what happens at death? I get a step up in basis. And if I get a step up in basis and that non-farm child wants to or needs to sell that farm ground back to the active farm child, what did we just save that inactive farm child? We saved them a ton of money because they did not have to pay the capital gain tax because they got a step up in basis. Now doesn't that light bulb go off for that inactive child? It's like, oh, I understand why mom and dad did it this way. I'm getting more money in the end because if I inherited it at the same time and then I turned around and I sold it, my net is going to be a lot less. Helping them understand the why. Why, mom and dad, are you making the decisions that you're making? Okay? So we talk about basis in our farm succession planning aspect. Let's talk about probably one of the most important aspects, and this gets to your question about the LLCs. Everything within a farm operation should have these components. They should have a buy-sell agreement, they should have a cash rent or lease agreement, operating agreements, and talk about employee benefits because we want to make sure we're structuring the terms prior to the event ever taking place. Okay? So when we talk about buy-sell agreements, buy-sell agreement is simply a legal agreement that creates a plan and defines control of how we're going to value the asset and how we're going to dispose of the asset or who has the right to obtain the asset. So why is this important? Okay? My wife, she works in the public school system. She's basically an assistant principal. Okay? Every day she goes to work, she's getting company paid health insurance, she's getting a pension, she's going to be making contributions to a 403B. Whose balance sheet is she building? Hers. Her brothers on the farm operation, they walk in and day out. They're getting paid a wage. Maybe they get a truck. Maybe they get some beef to fill their freezer. Whose balance sheet are they building? They're building the farm's balance sheet. So every day my wife goes to work, she's building our balance sheet. Every time the on-farm child goes to work, they're building the farm's balance sheet. Then as mom and dad pass away and they start distributing the assets and they distribute so the assets fairly, my wife didn't scrub water tanks, she didn't scoop bunks, she didn't ride pens, she didn't scrape yards, she didn't market cattle, she didn't doctor cattle. Why is she getting a fair stake at full market value of those assets? She has no sweat equity in the operation whatsoever. So when we put a buy-sell agreement in place, we can say, okay, if that off-farm child inherits a farm asset and they're going to sell it because they want a new home down in Florida, or they want a new ski resort in Colorado. Well, wait a second, you inherited that, you didn't pay for it. If you're going to sell it, you're going to sell it back to the active family member, and you're going to sell it back to them at a significant discount. Because we can't take the financial hit to the operation to pay you full market value and to force the on-farm child to go to the bank. So maybe if she wants to sell farm ground, she's selling it back at tax assessed value. Oh, and she's going to carry it back. She's going to be the banker. She's going to carry it back on what's called an installment note. So you don't force the on-farm child to go to the bank. So that is why buy-sell agreements are so important. We never sit and tell a family how they should treat their kids. But we will show a family what the financial repercussions are to their working capital or their cash flow based on the decisions that they're making emotionally. These are called triggering events. So buy-sell agreements should cover if somebody dies in the family, somebody becomes disabled and goes to the nursing home, somebody becomes divorced, simply just disagreements, bankruptcy, felony, or retirement. How are we going to get out of the business arrangement we're in, and how are we going to pull those assets back to the active farm family? And these can also have different valuation mechanisms. So if I went to the bar, played poker with my buddies, had way too much to drink and felt invincible and wanted to drive home, and I hit somebody, and now I'm getting sued and I own part of the farm assets, and since I own them, you can be forced me to sell them. But if we have a buy-sell agreement that says, hey, you were charged with the felony, we're buying you out on 50 cents on the dollar. So now they're buying me out 50 cents on the dollar, and what's subject to the lawsuit? The proceeds of my buyout, which was done on 50 cents on the dollar, not dollar for dollar of the farm assets. This is one of the most powerful tools in a farm succession plan that we talk about, is a buy-sell agreement. Okay? When we talk about cash rent or crop share agreements, okay? So what happens if that off-farm child does have that sentimental value and does want to own some of that farm ground, but yet they go down to the coffee shop in their local community and they hear that somebody's getting cash rent for $450 an acre and they're only getting $225. And now they're starting to stink because they think they're getting ripped off, but they don't have the slightest clue that there is totally difference between land types, soil types, irrigated versus dry land. They just don't put two and two together. So what we do is we have a cash rent or crop share arrangement between family members. And we'll reference the University of Nebraska's published report that comes out each March telling us what center pivot irrigated, flood irrigated, dry land in that region is going for. It's an independent source. It takes the arguments away from your family members. So now they're not saying, oh, well, you know, this isn't fair. I need more. This isn't fair. You need to be paying less. No, this is an independent source. There's no arguments. This is what mom and dad said it was going to be, and I have the right to cash rent from you. Now, if that on-farm child decides that they don't want to cash rent, then that off-farm child can take it to whoever they want to, because maybe that's a first right or refusal to cash rent rather than a guaranteed right to cash rent. That's the importance on how these documents are written and the verbiage that are in these documents to make sure that your wishes are carried through. Because the other aspect is if, let's say, we go back, pick on my family again. If my father-in-law passes away, okay, and then shortly thereafter my wife passes away and we don't have a plan. Or we have a simple I love you will and she's leaving me all of her assets. Guess who now owns part of the farm? The in-law, the outlaw. Okay? And now all of a sudden, I don't want to live in Nebraska in January and February anymore, and I want to go to Arizona. And I need the money to go build myself my new retirement home. And there's no buy-sell agreements and there are those cash rental agreements. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to force partition, I'm going to make you sell it, and we're going to take this thing to auction so I can get top dollar. I've seen it all. Our job, anybody you hire like us, their job is to make sure that they're covering the what-ifs. And I hear this all the time too. My kids would never sell the farm ground. I've told them since they were 2 to never sell the farm ground. Okay? Guys, once we're dead and gone, we can't control what our children do or what their spouses may want to do or what their grandkids, your grandkids or their children would want to do. What is the goal? Is the goal to try to make sure that the family farm and ranch can continue for future generations? If that's the number one goal, let's put a plan together that treats the kids fairly, but puts the farm and the ranch in a long-term success. So let's talk about some family scenarios. I think I have a little bit of time for this left. Okay. Number one, can the family financially afford to support everybody involved. Okay? That study has to be done. Can mom and dad be financially independent and walk away and enjoy their retirement years for the blood, sweat, and tears that they put in the operation? Can they walk away and pull cash flow from the operation, whatever facet that may look like, and still can it support everybody else? I was working with 4 brothers. Mom and dad had a medium-sized farm operation. And we had a family meeting, and the brothers actually realized that, yeah, we can't all make a living on this, and mom and dad. So the 4 brothers actually went out and made an agreement with themselves and said, we're going to get off the farm jobs. And whatever income we create off the farm is ours to support our family, but whatever the farm generates is going to get dumped back in to buy more ground and improve the farm operation. And the 4 brothers thought about this and really built an amazing business plan for it, because right now between the 4 brothers, we have one that has a seed dealership. We have one that became an agronomist. We have one that went to diesel mechanic school, and the other one selling crop insurance. They all went and got jobs or degrees or knowledge to help the farm and bring a value add back, because they realized the farm couldn't do that. That's where that family meeting was very important and got all of the siblings on the same page versus maybe the spouses fighting, saying, well, they're making more money than we are. Well, it's up to me to make the family money. The farm money stays within the farm. That guideline, that foundation was set day one. I was working with the ranch family. They own just over 30,000 acres. They have multi-families coming in, and we talked about family meeting, who wants to come back. And all their kids, sitting from ages 6 to 14, were a part of this initial family meeting and said, how many of you want to come back? There was 3 families. They each had 3 kids. There was 9 kids. What do you think they all said? We're all coming back. Can that ranch support 12 different families? No. So the family members have to start having the conversations of, how do we put our best foot forward for the ranch to succeed, but yet knowing not everybody can come back? Those are the conversations that need to happen. When we talk about non-active farm families, okay, we've talked about the concept versus fair versus equal. This is usually where I use my wife as an example, building her balance sheet. I used it earlier, okay? But we have to understand, what's that sweat equity component? What's that sweat equity worth? Okay? In most of our family-owned businesses, we've taken a ton of different approaches to it. You know, we've said, okay, the business was worth this when you came back full-time. 20 years later, it's now worth this. We wouldn't be here without you. So there's some sweat equity component that's worth that. Okay, maybe we give you 50% of that growth to help compensate you for your sweat equity. Because that off-the-farm child, what are they getting? Maybe they're getting contributions to their 401k plan. Maybe they're getting stock options. They're getting profit sharing. They're getting those types of things. Where your on-farm child is getting, son, daughter, someday this will all be yours. Okay? But yet we got to give some to your sister, your brother, and this and this and this. But you'll be able to farm everything because we told them not to sell it. Okay? One of the other adages we've used to compensate farm families for sweat equity is we're giving them 1% of the farm assets for every year of service. It's their profit sharing. So mom and dad pass away and they've been there for 30 years. Maybe they're getting the first 30% of the farm assets and the other 70% of the farm assets getting split equally between the kids. So if you have 3 kids, now all of a sudden that on-farm child has more than 50% equity in the farm operation, and he or she's got a better financial footing to be able to go to the bank and buy them out. Or maybe they're buying a second-to-die life insurance policy to buy their siblings out, because that second-to-die life policy will be a less premium than it would be going to borrow the money from the bank. Those are tools in the toolbox that everybody should explore. Active farming members, or they're all farming together today, this is where you have to mentor. You have to identify roles and successors and what they're specialized in. You have to mentor, and the kids need to have a buy-sell agreement between one another, because you probably don't want to be in business with your spouse or with their spouse. Okay? So we have to talk about the siblings' business plan and what that looks like. And then quickly we'll talk about what if the next generation's not coming back? Okay? What if that next generation's not coming back? What's your exit strategy? Had a client that came to me at the end of this last year. He said, Brandon, I was planning on farming another 3 to 5 years, but health conditions, I can't. And I'm going to have an auction at the end of the year. Okay? Well, we've all enjoyed what? Bonus 179 depreciation on our farm equipment, offsets our income. I mean, just drove our income down where he paid little to no tax. He had a farm auction. What are equipment auctions bringing today? He did amazing. He did amazing. He has to recapture all that depreciation in 2022. He's no prepaid inputs for 2023, and he's sitting on his harvest for 2022 and 2021 yet. Oh, Uncle Sam's just licking his chops. Because 50 cents on the dollar is going to federal, state, and Medicare, Social Security tax. I mean, all the taxes there. He's lost 50 cents on the dollar. Guys, if you don't have the next generation back, start your exit strategy. Because there are ways, there are tax codes where you can spread that tax liability out over your lifetime versus forcing it in one calendar year. There are things on the books called qualified retirement plans that are subject to ERISA. There's rules that you have to follow. But maybe you should look at a 401k plan or a solo 401k or a defined benefit plan or a cash balance plan. So you, instead of going out and buying that new combine for $700,000 just because you need the tax deduction, maybe we can put $300,000 or $400,000 into a qualified retirement plan, still take a tax deduction for it, and now you take required minimum distributions out over your lifetime and you spread that tax liability over your lifetime versus forcing it into one calendar year. There are so many tools in the trade out there if you're proactive. The other thing that we're really starting to notice, and Allan even hit on it with the land link, there's a lot of our farm families that are just devastated by seeing our smaller communities die. Our population's going to church, our population's going to school. I mean, when I grew up in Snyder, Nebraska, the population was about 290 people. It was a great small town to grow up in. My mom and dad just sold their business, and the first thing I said, you're selling the house because you will never get more than what it's worth today because the town is completely going into the abyss. Our farm families, if they can find that next generation that's a good steward of the ground, they're sending their kids to school, they're going to the church, they're supporting the Main Street businesses, I tell you what, they would rather cash rent the ground to you or even give you a buy-sell agreement for the opportunity to buy the farm ground than having their kids force it to go to auction. We're seeing it day in and day out. And then I'll see young people say, well, how do I start that conversation? I say, it's just like you're asking like you're asking the pretty girl to go to the school dance. If she says no, what worse are you off? But if she says yes, what is it going to do for you? So don't be afraid to approach those farm families that don't have the next generation coming back. And if you're that family that doesn't have the next generation coming back, be proactive with your exit strategy and go find a young farmer to rent to. Keep these communities thriving. All right, last couple of bits. Building your team. Guys, this takes a team. If there is ever anybody that comes to your place and says, you know what, I can do all this for you, run. Because they're just trying to sell you something. You need an attorney, you need your accountant, you need your ag banker. You need a team that is a specialist in their arenas that they work. Make sure they know what they're doing, okay? I pick on my attorney buddies all the time. I said, I got a good friend who's a small town attorney, and she has to make a living. She has to do child custody. She has to defend bankruptcy. She's got to defend DUI. She has to serve that role into the community. She'll be the first one to tell you, though, that she is not an advanced estate planning or farm succession planning attorney. She doesn't have the expertise or experience to draw the documents up to where they are. Okay? So when you're putting your team together, interview them, talk to them, and make sure you have experts sitting on your team. And with that, just reminding you, it's up to you to provide the legacy and what your future to look like. I will hang out and answer questions as long as you like. I have to be on the road here probably in 45 minutes, but I will hang out and answer questions as long as you like, and hopefully it was worthwhile. Thank you very much.